From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
Liberal frontbencher Julian Leeser has a lot on the go. He's Shadow Minister for Education and, as such, he's managing the opposition's response to the government's policy to bring major changes to the tertiary sector. He's also the opposition's leading Jewish voice and will soon appear at the Antisemitism Royal Commission. As well, he's spokesman on Indigenous affairs. And last term, of course, he stood down from the front bench to support the Voice to Parliament. Now he's crafting a policy on Aboriginal affairs, which is such an incredibly complex area. Julian Leeser joins the podcast today to talk about these issues as well as the state of the Liberal Party. Julian Leeser, let's start on education. The government has introduced legislation as part of its major overhaul of the tertiary education sector. The policy would give the minister the power to cap the number of students at universities. You've come out strongly against parts of the new system. Can you explain your response, why you think this is not a good idea?
Thanks, Michelle. I think there's two things to say. Firstly, we came out strongly against the Tertiary Education Commission because we felt that it just duplicated the functions of the department, and it was another regulator in a system that is already over-regulated with, I think by some counts, 15 regulators, what George Williams at WSU described as a thicket of regulation. We just didn't need another regulator to duplicate the functions of the department. So that was our position of ATEC. That is passed.
Would you abolish that?
Well, we believe at a time where you've got an inflation crisis, there are two things governments need to do. They need to reduce spending and they need to cut red tape, and ATEC does the opposite of those things. So it's certainly the sort of thing that we would look at, given that we opposed it, and we opposed it on principled grounds. I think the bill that is currently before the Parliament, we haven't taken a position on in that it's going to go to a Senate committee. We are keen to see the Senate committee's position. If it goes through the House and we have a vote on it, we won't oppose it in the House, but we want to see what the Senate committee has to say, because this bill really changes the way in which the university system operates. Before I was a parliamentarian, I worked in the university system. In the sector. In those days, there was lots of competition and innovation in the sector. It was a time of growth. Now the sector is saying they don't like competition, they don't want growth, they want a more managed system. And this particular bill puts real powers, quite extraordinary powers, in the hands of the minister. And I think we need to investigate what the real cost of this is, because the minister has said one thing publicly and the explanatory memorandum says something different. We've got to understand what the powers are and how these powers could be used in the future, and that's what the Senate committee will examine.
Let's go back to a policy brought in by the Morrison government, and that's the Job Ready Graduate Scheme. Now, this changed fees, it changed the burden between the costs borne by students and by government, and it led to massive increases in arts degree costs. And on the other hand, of course, there was some relief for science and areas like that. But the scheme has been widely criticised. The government hasn't, however, done anything about it. It's cited the cost of change. What's the Liberal attitude now on this program?
I think the first thing to say, Michelle, is when we introduced this policy, we said we would review it in 2022. That review has never taken place because we lost government. And this government, when they were in opposition, complained about the Job Ready Graduates package. They promised to review. The policy has now been Labor policy much longer than it was coalition policy. We've again called for the government to stick to their promise and have a review. The minister has said that he's going to get ATEC to review this in 18 months' time. I think we'll await the outcome of any review, but I think it's just extraordinary that you can complain so much about a policy and keep it in without a review.
And do the Liberals still believe in it?
We, I think, have to see the results of the review. I think the basis of the policy was designed to encourage people into areas like science and engineering and into agriculture and the like. We need to see to what extent that has happened. We need to see to what extent, if you were to change it, what would be your options for changing it to, and what would all that cost?
So potentially you're open to change. You haven't made a decision.
We have the policy of having a review. I think it's the sensible thing to have a review and then wait to see the outcome of the review.
Just in broad terms and fairly briefly, what is your overall vision for higher education policy, and when will you actually release a policy?
Well, we'll obviously release a policy between now and the next election, and we as the coalition are committing to ensuring that Australians know and understand our policies well in advance of the next election. But I'm not going to give you a date for the actual release, but the policy development process is going along quite strongly. And I have to say, I've been around politics a long time. I can't recall in this early in the term the level of policy development going on across the board. So I think that's a good sign. In terms of how we view the higher education sector, higher education's got a couple of key things to do. Firstly, it's very important in terms of ensuring that we have graduates who understand the world that they live in, the world that they're going to go into, and the civilization which has created the society in which we live. Secondly, it's got to provide an education for people that will make them employable in the job market. They are the two key factors in relation to teaching and learning. And the third factor is obviously research. The higher education system is very important in terms of producing quality research, which can help boost Australia's productivity and see our economy grow into the future.
Do you think that higher education is in some sort of crisis?
I think there's a lack of confidence in higher education at the moment. I mean, when I went to the Universities Australia Conference, the universities themselves are talking about issues around their social licence to operate. You've had the antisemitism crisis that's been on campus. You've had issues around AI and cheating factories. You've had issues around foreign interference on our campuses. And I think there's a loss of confidence that the broader public has in the sector, but I think there's also a loss of confidence within the sector itself. And I just contrasted from the days when I worked in the sector more than a decade ago, where it was a growing, confident part of Australia. You just don't hear that from the sector anymore.
I think there's a feeling that the Conservatives, the coalition, are really somewhat anti the higher education sector, are suspicious of universities. Is that a fair perception?
Well, I think you go back in history. Menzies, the founder of our party, is the great expander of university opportunity in our history. And he saw universities, rightly so, as a place to expand opportunities for people who were just like him. A poor boy from a one-teacher school in a one-horse town who, through dint of his own intellectual efforts, wanted to create opportunities for himself and his family. That's still what I think universities are about. We still need to have strong universities that are world-class, to produce the research that can grow our economy and to produce the graduates that understand the world they're entering into, that understand our civilization, and that have skills that can help them get a job in the job market.
But there is a very different attitude from the one Menzies held among many in the coalition these days.
Well, I think the universities have to answer for some of the things that they've done in recent years. I think there are a really declining level of confidence in them because of their handling of the antisemitism crisis, because of their dealing with foreign interference, because of some of the ways in which they've taught some of the subjects, because of the assessment system. I mean, I've come out strongly against group assignments because I think, so many students complain about them. There's no problem with group work going on at universities, but I just don't think it's a legitimate assessment form in most instances.
So that prompts the question, really, do you think that universities, with this explosion of education as an export, have become too obsessed with money?
Well, I think running universities is an expensive business, and I think universities need to try and balance the books as any business does, and they're always looking to expand and diversify their sources of revenue. But I think none of that should ever come at the expense of quality. By quality, I mean a quality teaching and learning experience, high quality research, high quality assessment, and a quality student experience. And I think there has been a decline in that in recent years.
So should we contract the growth of that export industry?
Well, look, we've been very clear, and when I spoke to the Universities Australia conference back in March, I said that our policy is to reduce the net overseas migration level and that students would play a part. They're the biggest component in net overseas migration, and that I would be working with the universities to work out how we actually achieve that. I've had lots of consultations since that time. Also, since that time, Angus Taylor has indicated that the way in which we will come up with a NOM figure is to look at the housing construction in a particular year and match the NOM to the housing construction. And so we are going to see a contraction in the number of international students under a coalition government, because we need to be able to house the people that are here first and foremost.
Nevertheless, it is a very important export industry, isn't it? So in a way, that holds an export industry hostage to migration policy.
Well, it's our fourth largest export industry behind coal, natural gas and iron ore. It's a very important export industry, but the role of universities first and foremost is to educate Australians. And to the extent that we're offering opportunities for international students, it has to be a high quality opportunity.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of times anti-Semitism. Let's turn to that. You're going to give evidence soon to the Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism. We've recently heard from Josh Burns, a Jewish Labor MP, and the experiences, the really bad experiences he's had over the last couple of years. Why do you think anti-Semitism seems so entrenched in Australia, even beyond the triggering events of 2023? Obviously, it was there below the surface and quite strong.
Well, I think anti-Semitism was a problem before October 7, 2023. It was a problem on campus, and we know that because the Australasian Union of Jewish Students released a survey that said 63% of Jewish students had hidden their identity on campus, that they had experienced anti-Semitism. 19% were satisfied when they'd made a complaint and had anything done about it, and many Jews were just staying away from campus altogether. That's in the microcosm of the university sector. But it had been an issue from time to time, but we saw an explosion after October 7, and we saw an explosion after Bondi as well. One of the reasons I think we saw an explosion after October 7 was because that leaders in government, in law enforcement, in universities and the Human Rights Commission were not strong enough, early enough to crack down on things. I mean, the mere fact that the day after the October 7 terrorist attacks in Israel, you had people in Western Sydney saying, this is the day we've been waiting for, this is a day of elation, that you had those protests outside the Opera House where people were saying, gas the Jews or where's the Jews, and burning flags and so on. And rather than clamping down on that vigorously, these things were allowed to fester. So I blame the leadership of Australia at the time at those various levels. I think that's the first thing you need to deal with anti-Semitism. Running a society, I often say, is like running a family. Children, like societies, need boundaries. They crave boundaries and they want to see those boundaries enforced, and they were not enforced. But what I think you've seen in recent years is something deeper. I think you've seen anti-Semitism manifest itself in three areas. In the sort of neo-Nazi kind of far-right world, where, it's just extraordinary to see neo-Nazis running around our streets of Sydney and Melbourne, and the neo-Nazi training camps that are going on. They need to be dealt with by stronger laws and tougher security measures, tougher powers for the security agencies. Then you've got the radical Islamists who need a similar treatment, who basically see the latest manifestation of anti-Semitism. First, Jews were hated for their religion, then they were hated for their race, now they're hated for their nation state. And anti-Semitism is different to any other sort of racism because no other sort of racism has behind it lies about conspiracy, about control, and about improper power. And that's why the third group of anti-Semites has been so dangerous. That's the anti-Semites of the cultural and academic left, who see being against Jews as some sort of virtuous thing because they're against improper power and control and the like. And that's its most recent manifestation. So we need to particularly have strong leadership against all three forms there. And I just don't think we've had that. And Sadly, it took the murder of 15 Australians in our worst terrorist attack on our most famous beach to get the government to finally call the Royal Commission and take action. I mean, I've got up in the last couple of years and made speeches about a judicial inquiry into antisemitism on campus, calling for stronger laws, calling for the listing of the IRGC and providing our support to do so, calling for the booting of the ambassador to Iran. And on every occasion, the government was dragged kicking and screaming to do the job.
Obviously, social media has become the sort of channel for a lot of this stuff being perpetrated in the public arena. So should more be done specifically on social media? We've had hate laws and other measures, but in terms of social media, it seems so hard to actually control this.
Let me say a few things. Let me firstly give you a little bit of my own experience. My family have been in Australia since 1841. My great-grandfather was at Gallipoli in the charge of the lighthouse at Beersheba. My grandfather was a prisoner of war in Chengyan on the Burma Railway. And yet I am regularly called a traitor and a Mossad agent on my social media posts that have nothing to do with the Jewish community or nothing to do with foreign policy. That's the experience of me as a public figure who's Jewish. And that's also, sadly, the experience of many people who don't enter public life who are Jewish today. I think what's happening on social media is completely out of control. There shouldn't be a parallel universe where you can do things on social media that you can't do in the real world. And I think social media companies need to pull the finger out and be much stronger in taking down anti-Semitic comments and behaviour than they are. And if they're not, then we need to consider stronger regulation. Australia, going back to the time of the Media Bargaining Code, has been a world leader in calling social media companies to account, and we should continue to be so.
You called the other day for the Iranian embassy to be closed. Now, we've expelled the ambassador. What's the case for actually closing the embassy? Maybe it's needed for administrative reasons and the like.
Michelle, I represent the third largest Persian community in Australia, and for years the Persian community has been coming to me and talking to me about the fears that they have of being intimidated and being surveilled by the embassy. Obviously, that was part of the reason I was so strong so early on in calling for the expulsion of the ambassador and in calling for the IRGC to be listed and for diplomatic relations to cease. But even though the ambassador is gone and the IRGC has been listed, they continue to complain about these issues. Recently, we had the Director General of Security give his annual threat assessment. He mentioned Iran there 16 times. He said that his great worry was that there would be some form of attack of the sort that they're seen in Europe, where an Iranian-backed person effectively attacks an Australian here. I mean, we've already seen Iran attack Australia twice at the Adass Israel synagogue bombing and at the Lewis Continental Kitchen firebombing. I think the Iranian embassy continues, at least this is what my Persian community says to me, that they continue to be a source of surveillance, they continue to be a source of intimidation for law-abiding Australians, and we just shouldn't have any of it.
Among your responsibilities, you're also Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians. Now, you supported The Voice. You stepped down from the front bench at the time to do that. We now hear the ACTU saying The Voice proposal should be revived in some form. What's your response to that?
I think after the referendum, we needed a new direction to move beyond the Uluru Statement, and I've been critical of the government for not having taken the opportunity of raising the issues of Indigenous disadvantage at the referendum to crack on and say, well, that wasn't the right method to achieve these things, but we've still got these issues. We need to double down on some of the challenges. So I think some of the big challenges we've got to face is Indigenous school attendance and school retention, and I'm looking forward to saying a few things about those in the coming weeks. We've got to do some things around Indigenous suicide, which continues to go backwards, and we've got to do something about the fact that I think something like 47% or more of Australia's land mass is under Indigenous title. We need to be able to unlock intergenerationally transformative economic opportunity that hasn't been done there. They're just three areas where I think the government could press harder.
Well, just to take up school attendance, I do remember Tony Abbott used to be very strong on this issue before being Prime Minister and when Prime Minister, and yet it just doesn't seem to be achievable.
Well, I had the people from Clontarf in yesterday, the Clontarf Foundation, which basically provides as a carrot, if people want to play sport, that they have to go to school. And they've been incredibly successful in terms of improving Aboriginal school attendance. And I want to give some praise to the government here. It was good to see in the budget more funding for Clontarf. We need to roll out programs like that more across our country because they've been shown to work. The first group of Clontarf students went through in 2002. The employment rate of those students who had a great school attendance rate is massive, but even more, it's been intergenerationally transformative. Their kids value education and have a terrific school attendance rate. So I think the most important thing we can do is get our kids to school if we're going to achieve major change in outcomes for Aboriginal people.
And on this question of intergenerational land transfer or land rights, what should be done there?
I think we need to look at the system more broadly. What are the impediments to achieving economic outcomes? Are there legislative impediments? Are there regulatory impediments? Are there decisions being made at a local level that are removing economic outcomes? In a broader Australian community, people often take their house and use the equity in their home to start a business because you've got the freehold, you're able to borrow against that. You can't do that with a lot of Indigenous title. We want to be able to drive economic aspiration and economic opportunity from Indigenous land rights that I just don't think is there.
It's difficult to do when the land is held sort of in perpetuity and collectively and traditionally, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that's why we need, I think, to look at this and work out what are the things that we can do to get better economic benefits. I want to give a shout out to my colleague Tim Wilson. When he was Human Rights Commissioner, he began looking at some of these issues along with a range of different Indigenous leaders. That there is a growing sense among Indigenous leaders that more could be done with this title, and I think we need to see how we can do that in a sensible and responsible way, and in a way that provides more economic opportunity for Indigenous people.
The nation was shocked recently at the alleged murder of a very small child who'd been allegedly abducted from a town camp near Alice Springs. What needs to be done about these town camps?
I went to Alice Springs shortly after the death of Kumanjai, little baby, to be part of the vigil, and I met the family and I met a number of the service providers up there. Since that time, I've written to the Auditor General and we've asked questions and Senate estimates as well, but I particularly think we need an audit of the spending in those town camps. The Commonwealth spends millions of dollars, and yet a little baby was put in a house that was unsafe, in a room that was crowded with Jim Beam bottles. I went to see some of those town camps when I was in Alice Springs, and the conditions aren't right for the amount of money that's being spent. And so I've asked the Auditor General to look at what we're actually getting for that spending and how we're delivering outcomes there. And it's not just in the town camps in Alice Springs, it's in other parts of Australia as well. There was recently a story about the area in central western New South Wales. Again, umpteen different agencies, lots of money going in, but a bus that's not getting kids to school. So the role of the NIAA, the National Indigenous Australians Agency, is in part to coordinate this spending, to see, how the money is going out there, to see what are the outcomes going on the ground. And yet I don't think that it's achieving those outcomes. That's why I've written to the Auditor General.
Before we finish, of course, we must talk about the Liberal Party. The polls are dreadful. It's now more than a year since the election. You've had a change of leadership. Hasn't done any good. Your leader, Angus Taylor, says it'll all take more time. Every Liberal you talk to says we must do more work. And yet nothing seems to be really reviving the Liberal Party. What do you think can be done?
I want to take a little bit of a helicopter view of this, Michelle. I think, what do we see in Australia today? We see declining purchasing power from people's wages. Since this shocking federal budget with its new taxes, we've seen reductions in the value of people's family homes. So in such an environment, people are feeling less sure and less confident about the future, and they're searching around for alternatives. And I think we need to remind people what the Liberal Party stands for. At the end of the day, we want Australians to have strong borders, and we want Australians to make money. That's the core of what the Liberal Party is about. No other party can offer those things. We've seen the Labor Party is very poor at managing money, and they've historically been, and in this government, are poor at managing our borders. One Nation, they talk a lot about radical Islam, but, we will go toe-to-toe with them every single day on these issues, because we were the party that was calling for the listing of the IRGC. We were the party that was calling for the expulsion of the Iranian ambassador, and we were at Bondi every single day after the terrorist attacks. As I go around my electorate and as I talk to people, I'm hearing the concerns that Australians have. I'm hearing their concerns about the future of the country, and they are angry. And I think that our job is to ensure that we've come up with a suite of policy issues that address that, and we're building that foundation, whether it's on the tax-back guarantee, we're stopping Jim Chalmers' $200 million assault on people's pay packets by effectively saying to people, if you get a salary rise and that puts you into a new pay packet, that's into a new tax bracket, we're not going to allow that to happen in the future because we're going to link the tax brackets to inflation. So inflation doesn't gobble up your salary increase. We've said we're going to tie migration to housing construction so that we can house the people who are here. We've done things like ensure that in housing we've got a $5 billion investment in last mile infrastructure that should create 40,000 new homes and reduce the cost of constructing homes by 70,000. We've got an energy policy which is focused on ensuring that we've got affordable and reliable energy first. We've got to continue to build these foundations over the next couple of years as we come to the next election that really address the concerns Australians are raising.
But despite all that, many people are turning to One Nation rather than turning to the opposition, which in earlier times would have seemed the more logical course for them.
As I say, because of people's declining real wages and the declining value of the family home, people are angry at the system. And I appreciate and understand that anger, and they are looking at alternatives. Our job is to come up with alternatives that are attractive to them over the next few years, and that's the foundation that we're laying.
Isn't one of your problems these days that people expect more from government? They want big government, as it were, whereas the Liberals are traditionally and under Angus Taylor promoting small government.
I think big government is actually the problem of why we are where we are today. I mean, we have an inflation and productivity crisis in Australia because we've had so much additional red tape and regulation from this government, because we've had so much additional spending. And the orthodox thing that you do in an inflation crisis is that you reduce red tape and you reduce government expenditure, and this government has done the opposite. So I think we need to stick to our guns on these points, because we're not arguing for something radical or ideological. We're arguing for what has traditionally worked and which this government refuses to try.
Another of your problems seems to be that the Liberals are somewhat all over the place on how to respond to One Nation. Some Liberals are saying we have to have some sort of accommodation, whether it's on preferences or even sharing out seats, according to one or two. Others, like Andrew Hastie, in full-on combat. Is this a problem, and what's your position?
I'm not focused on these issues, Michelle. My focus is about building a policy platform in my areas of responsibility and ensuring that we're actually out there prosecuting the case for those policy areas in energy, in tax, in housing, in migration that we've talked about. That's what I'm talking to people in our community about. That's the focus of my work.
Just finally, Julian Leeser, this week marks your 10-year anniversary of entering Parliament. What's been your biggest reflection about your time in politics?
I think Scott Ryan, the former Senate President, said to me when I came in here that one of the things that you'd regret is the times that you didn't speak up rather than the times that you did. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the 10 years is that it's always important to speak up for the things that you believe in and for your community and for your values. And that's been a real reflection for me, that when I've done those things, that's always been a good contribution, and I've enjoyed the service. I want to say I'm incredibly grateful to the people of Berowra and the Liberal Party in Berowra for giving me these opportunities, and I hope to continue to serve them for years to come.
Well, happy anniversary. Julian Leeser, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. That's all for now. Thank you to my producer, Ben Roper. We'll be back with another interview soon, but goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.